Imagine committing the perfect crime. Like, you leave no fingerprints at all.
Right, just totally off the radar.
Exactly. There are no witnesses. I mean, the police have absolutely zero leads to go on. And then you just walk away. You move across the Pacific Ocean, and you live this full, completely happy, peaceful life in Hawaii for, 40 years.
It's just staggering to think about.
It really is.
Wow.
Because what you don't realize is that you left behind this microscopic time capsule at the crime scene in 1982. And it's just sitting there.
Yeah, just waiting in an evidence locker.
Right, waiting for the day humanity basically invents the key to open it.
It creates this really fascinating tension between human limitations and, biological permanence. The evidence was preserved, just locked in time. It's holding the darkest secret imaginable while this entire scientific revolution quietly took place in the background.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Looking through the stack of case files and the investigation report you shared with us, it's titled The DNA of Justice, the 40-year hunt for Karen Stitt. What really stands out to me isn't just the forensic leap.
Oh, absolutely. The science is incredible, but it's not the whole story.
No, not at all. Today, we're going to explore how a quietly devastating 1982 cold case from this seemingly perfect California suburb was finally resolved 4 decades later. And our mission here is to uncover how this was accomplished not merely by a technological miracle, but really by the stubbornness of one modern detective.
Yeah, combined with the meticulous, I'd say almost prophetic foresight of the original 1982 investigators.
Right. Because to grasp the magnitude of that 40-year gap, you really have to ground yourself in the reality of the era where this all began. I mean, we are looking at Sunnyvale, California in 1982.
And in the early 80s, this was, the quintessential idyllic American suburb.
Like the classic movie suburb.
Exactly. We are talking about tree-lined streets, very quiet neighborhoods. It was a profoundly safe environment. The cultural assumption at the time was simply that, nothing truly malicious ever happens in Sunnyvale.
Right. The stranger danger panic wasn't really a thing yet, at least not there.
No, not at all. Parents genuinely didn't calculate the risk of their kids taking the public bus at night. It just wasn't on their radar.
And into the setting steps Karen Stitt. She is 15 years old. She had recently moved from Ohio to live with her father, and she's just navigating that classic high school transition at Palo Alto, right?
Yeah, just trying to fit in.
Exactly. Making friends, figuring out a totally new state, starting to build her life on the West Coast. And her aunt later described her using 3 very specific words: bright, kind, and beautiful.
She was just a totally normal teenager.
Just normal, spending a completely unremarkable warm California evening visiting her teenage boyfriend, David Woods.
But the catalyst for everything that follows happens on the night of September 2nd, 1982. Around midnight, the visit is over, and Karen needs to get back home to Palo Alto. So David walks her to the corner of El Camino Real and Wolf Road to catch her bus.
Right.
He walks her toward the stop, but he doesn't wait with her.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the psychology of this moment is just staggering when you view it in hindsight.
It really is.
David leaves her near the bus stop and literally runs home to beat his curfew. He calculates this immediate teenage risk, like, I am going to get grounded if I'm late, which is, a universally normal, mundane decision.
Anyone who has ever been a teenager understands that exact panic.
Exactly. But that routine calculation violently and randomly collides with an act of pure evil. He looks back just once, and she turns the corner. And that single glance over his shoulder is the last time anyone who loved Karen Stitt ever saw her alive.
Oh, wow.
It just highlights the terrifying fragility of our daily routines, how one tiny, completely innocent decision alters the trajectory of dozens of lives forever.
Yeah, and the brutal reality of that collision surfaced just hours later. It transitioned the narrative from a quiet, anxious night to a truly horrifying morning.
Right.
And the immediate aftermath exposed not just a savage crime, but the severe fundamental limitations of law enforcement technology during that era.
It wasn't the police who found her, right?
No, it was a delivery driver. A delivery driver passing that exact same stretch of road near the bus stop spotted something behind a cinder block wall, roughly 100 yards from where Karen was supposed to wait.
And the details from the crime scene report you provided are incredibly grim. I mean, listener, you have to brace yourself. Karen had been bound with her own clothing, she'd been sexually assaulted, and she was stabbed 59 times.
It's just an unfathomable level of violence.
It really is. Her personal belongings, like her makeup, the contents of her bag, they were just violently scattered across the area. It was a scene of overwhelming chaos and aggression.
But what's fascinating here is and I use that word in the most clinical, tragic sense possible, the killer left behind his calling card amid all that chaos.
A time capsule.
Exactly. He left his blood and bodily fluid right there on Karen's body. Now, in today's landscape, that is a neon sign pointing directly to the perpetrator.
Oh, case closed, basically.
Right. But in 1982, the science of DNA profiling for criminal investigations was still, well, science fiction. The tools to decode human biology simply did not exist.
So they had this biological time capsule, but absolutely
Right.
no way to open it. I found it striking in the sources that the 1982 detectives did everything right according to the playbook of their era,
They did. They really did.
but that playbook was just incredibly thin.
Well, think about what they could actually do. They could text for basic blood type, but doing so only narrows a suspect pool down to millions of people.
Right, it doesn't really help find one guy.
No, it might exclude someone, but it rarely points to a specific individual. So they dusted for fingerprints, which was their most advanced identification technology at the time.
But nothing came of it.
Exactly. The prints pulled from the scene yielded nothing useful. So investigators are left staring at this horrific crime, holding a massive amount of physical evidence, and watching the trail instantly freeze.
It's so frustrating. And while the physical trail goes cold, I found the collateral damage in the sources almost as disturbing as the crime itself.
The human cost is just immense.
Right. We always focus heavily on the killer and the victim in these narratives. But David Woods essentially lost his freedom too, just in a different way. I mean, what does this all mean for the people left behind? We always focus on the bad guy, but isn't it true that a cold case essentially sentences the survivors to their own kind of prison?
Oh, absolutely. That shadow of suspicion is a psychological prison. I mean, David was 15 years old. The girl he cares about is murdered. He is carrying this excruciating survivor's guilt of running home.
Just to beat a curfew.
Right. And because he was the last person to see her alive, he instantly falls under the shadow of suspicion. For 4 decades, he was a primary person of interest.
40 years of looking over your shoulder.
And he cooperated completely, you know? He gave statements, he answered every question investigators threw at him over the years. But in a local community, when a case stalls and there is no alternative suspect, the whispers do not stop.
People talk.
They do. He bore the weight of an entire community's suspicion. He grew up, built a career, and aged into his 50s, all while carrying a label he never, ever deserved.
To lose someone you care about and then be quietly accused of it for the rest of your adult life is just unthinkable. The math of the time lost is staggering to me.
It really puts it into perspective.
Yeah, the 1980s turned into the 1990s, and then the 2000s, we entered decades of waiting. And this brings up something that genuinely confused me in the files you shared.
What's that?
Well, by the 1990s and early 2000s, DNA profiling becomes standard practice, right? Law enforcement has CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, the big national database.
Right, the game changer.
Yeah, so the Sunnyvale investigators kept running that preserved biological time capsule through CODIS, waiting for a match. But they got nothing.
0 hits. Just a ghost in the database.
Wait, I have to push back on this, because how does a guy who stabs a teenager 59 times just vanish?
It defies logic, I know.
I mean, someone capable of that level of explosive violence doesn't usually just go back to a quiet life of knitting and gardening for 40 years. Was he just incredibly lucky? Or is there a massive blind spot in how CODIS collects its data?
It is definitely a massive blind spot, and it's based on the legal architecture of the database itself.
Okay, how so?
Well, CODIS is only as robust as the legal parameters dictating who gets swabbed. Historically, you only ended up in that system if you were convicted of a qualifying felony after the database was established, or, if state laws were updated to mandate collection for certain crimes.
So not everyone who gets arrested goes in.
Exactly. If an offender commits lower-level misdemeanors, or if they just manage to avoid law enforcement completely in states with stricter swabbing criteria, their profile never enters the national system.
Wow.
The killer was basically operating in the void outside those very specific parameters.
So the system works perfectly, but only for the people caught in its very specific net. That is incredibly frustrating.
It is, and because of that, the case just sits in a filing cabinet until 2017.
Right, 35 years after the murder. That's when Detective Matt Hutchison of the Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety takes over. And according to his interviews in the source material, he wasn't looking to be the hero on the evening news.
No, not at all his style.
He just fundamentally believed that the victims and the families suspended in that agonizing limbo are owed answers.
And that underlying philosophy is what drove him to try a mechanism that was Around 2018, relatively groundbreaking and honestly pretty legally complex for local departments to utilize.
Genetic genealogy.
Exactly. It fundamentally shifted the entire approach to unidentified DNA.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because genetic genealogy completely bypasses the legal blind spots of CODIS. You have to think about it like trying to find the author of an anonymous, terrible book.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. So CODIS is like walking into a traditional bookstore and checking if the author's name is printed on the cover of any other books on the shelf. If they haven't published anything else under their real name, you find absolutely nothing. You are stuck.
The bookstore search requires a direct match, but genetic genealogy abandons the bookstore entirely.
Yes. Instead of looking for a direct match, you start reading the footnotes of the anonymous book. You look at the specific formatting, the obscure quotes, and you trace the publishing history of the author's distant cousins.
Right. In forensic terms, investigators take the killer's DNA and upload it to consumer genealogical databases.
The ones people use to find their heritage.
Exactly. But only the specific ones where everyday users explicitly opt in to allow law enforcement searches. They aren't looking for the killer directly. They are looking for someone who shares a tiny percentage of DNA.
Like a distant relative.
Yeah, maybe a third or fourth cousin who just wanted to find out what region of Europe their family came from.
It's so wild that that works.
It does. It relies on measuring centimorgans, which are these units of genetic linkage. If they find a third cousin, the genetic genealogist has to build a reverse family tree.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is. They trace that cousin's lineage backward, relying on birth certificates, marriage licenses, and old census data, going all the way up to a set of great-great-grandparents from the 1800s.
Okay, so they go way back in time.
Right. And then they trace every single descending branch of that family tree forward in time to the present day, looking for the one specific branch that intersects with the time and location of the crime.
I mean, it is painstakingly slow, but the mechanism is undeniable. By early 2019, Hutchison's massive genealogical mapping pointed to a very specific branch, 4 brothers originating from Fresno, California.
Yep. The killer's DNA meant he was almost certainly one of these 4 men.
But here is the friction. DNA can only get you to the family unit in this scenario. It cannot tell you which brother committed the crime.
No, it can't. So to cross that final finish line, Hutchison had to abandon the genetics lab and revert to old-school analog detective work.
Right, boots on the ground.
Exactly. You have 4 brothers. How do you eliminate 3 of them? You start cross-referencing geographical footprints from September 1982. You pull public records, military histories, residential addresses.
Right. Were any of the brothers incarcerated at the time? Were they deployed overseas?
Exactly. And through a rigorous process of elimination, looking at who had specific ties to the Bay Area when Karen was killed, the focus narrowed entirely onto one man, Gary Ramirez.
The timeline of Gary Ramirez's life, when you contrast it with the devastation he caused, is genuinely jarring. The records show he grew up in Fresno, served in the Air Force in the 1970s, and then he just bounced around.
Living a pretty normal life, ostensibly.
Yeah. He lived in the Bay Area, spent time in Colorado, and eventually settled down in Makawao on the island of Maui in Hawaii.
And by the time investigators finally lock onto his location and confirm his identity, Ramirez is 75 years old.
75. Just living out his golden years, watching the sunset in a Hawaiian paradise, completely insulated from the consequences of his actions.
While Karen's family is trapped in an endless cycle of grief.
Yes. And David Woods is walking around California with an invisible target on his back, aging under the suspicion of his own community. I mean, the sheer injustice of that contrast. The stolen time, it's infuriating.
It forces us to reconcile with the hardest reality of cold cases. The capture does not erase the decades of unearned peace the perpetrator enjoyed.
No, it doesn't.
But the net had finally closed. In August 2022, a massive coordinated operation took place involving local Sunnyvale authorities and Hawaiian law enforcement.
And this was heavily funded by a Department of Justice grant, right?
Yes, specifically designed to shoulder the massive financial burden of prosecuting cold cases. Because this stuff is incredibly expensive, they arrived at his home in Maui and they arrested Gary Ramirez.
You know, when a high-profile arrest like this happens, the lead detective is usually the man of the hour, kicking a victory lap. But Hutchison does something remarkable that speaks to the core of how forensic science actually operates across generations.
What stood out to you?
He completely refuses to take full credit.
Yeah.
He tells reporters, "It was all of us, it's not just me." He points directly back to 1982. stating he was only able to map the genetics because the original investigators collected and preserved the clothing and fluids flawlessly.
Oh, that intergenerational teamwork is the unseen backbone of the justice system.
It really is.
Think about it. In 1982, those evidence technicians were bagging samples without the slightest concept of what DNA profiling or genetic genealogy would become.
They couldn't even imagine it.
Right. They were acting entirely on procedural faith, trusting that if they followed protocol perfectly, the science of tomorrow might be able to read what they couldn't. Hutchison's humility is really a recognition that he just ran the anchor leg of a 40-year relay race.
That's beautifully said. But, I want to push back a little on the neat cinematic bow we try to tie around these victories.
How do you mean?
Well, the narrative of the triumphant detective ignores the heavy, dark reality of the work. Hutchison is clearly brilliant at this. He actually used the exact same genetic method to solve another Sunnyvale cold case, the 1979 murder of Estella Mena.
Right, he's incredibly skilled.
But when you read his quotes to reporters, he doesn't sound victorious. He sounds burdened. He admitted, "They're going to haunt me. These cases will affect me for the rest of my life." You really have to imagine carrying that weight.
The psychological cost of chasing the dead is profound.
Yeah.
You are voluntarily swimming in the darkest, most depraved moments of human history every single day. You spend your career analyzing crime scene photos of children, internalizing the desperate grief of parents, and confronting the reality that profound evil often goes unpunished for decades.
He has to take a toll.
It does. And even when you successfully close a case, you aren't bringing the victim back. You are just confirming the worst possible truth for a family that has spent 40 years hoping for a different answer.
So what does this all mean when the gavel finally falls? It brings us to the courtroom in 2025 and what I look at as the brutal math of justice.
The math is definitely brutal.
After extraditions and legal maneuvering, Gary Ramirez is now 78 years old. In May of 2025, he pleads guilty to first-degree murder. To secure the plea and avoid a protracted trial, other enhancements were dropped, and he received a maximum sentence of 25 years to life in a California state facility.
So at 78, he will almost certainly die in a prison cell.
Yeah. And this legal resolution finally provided the platform for the surviving victims to confront the reality of the crime.
Right. David Woods, the teenage boy who ran home to beat his curfew and spent decades under suspicion, he stood up in court as a man in his late 50s.
Wow.
He addressed the court, stating that Ramirez's heinous crimes ended Karen's life in a horrific way, causing deep heartache and continued suffering for the many that loved Karen Stitt.
40 years of carrying that weight.
Right.
He finally gets to look the architect of that nightmare in the eye.
It's powerful.
But the moment that anchors this entire exploration, for me, came from Karen's aunt, Robin Morris. When she addressed the court, she refused to let the horror of the crime scene define her niece's legacy.
Yeah, she reclaimed the narrative.
Exactly. She focused entirely on the person Karen was, describing her with those three words, bright, kind, and beautiful. When we look at the files you shared with us, keeping Karen's humanity at the center, remembering a 15-year-old girl with a future, rather than just the subject of a procedural cold case file, is the most vital takeaway.
I agree completely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the courtroom proceedings force us to confront a deeply uncomfortable concept, which is the illusion of closure.
The illusion of closure. Say more about that.
Well, during the sentencing phase, the family provided a heartbreaking, clear-eyed assessment. They stated, "There will never be true justice as Karen will not and cannot come back." We collectively use the word closure, as if solving the puzzle somehow heals the initial wound. But for the families involved, it's merely the ending of a terrible chapter that never should have been written in the first place.
It doesn't undo the 40 years Ramirez spent surfing and enjoying his retirement in Hawaii. It doesn't give David Woods back the peace of mind he deserved during his 20s and 30s. It's a brutal equation.
It really is.
Yes, the perpetrator's finally in a cage, but it took 4 decades and a revolution in science to put him there. And looking at this one victory makes you realize there are hundreds of thousands of unsolved homicides currently sitting in filing cabinets across the country.
Just waiting.
Thousands of families still waiting in that limbo who don't have a relentless detective like Matt Hutchison or a massive DOJ grant to fund the science needed to save them.
It is a sobering reflection on resource allocation. I mean, the technology to read these biological time capsules exists, but the financial and manpower resources to apply genetic genealogy universally simply do not.
It's just too expensive right now.
Exactly. Every single cold case solved is a monumental triumph of human ingenuity, but it's very Success illuminates the massive, ongoing backlog of justice delayed.
Well, as we wrap up today's exploration of the sources you brought us, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over, building on the incredible science we've been unpacking. We started by comparing the evidence left in 1982 to a biological time capsule.
Right.
Think about human DNA as the ultimate immortal witness. In 1982, the original investigators couldn't hear a single word the witness had to say. For 40 years, the killer managed to outrun it, living his life in the sun. But the witness never forgot the truth, and it never changed its story.
It remained perfectly preserved, just waiting for us to learn its language.
Exactly. So what happens to the very concept of the perfect crime in the future? If human biology has evolved into an undeniable, time-stamped recording that outlives us all, will the fundamental nature of how human beings think about secrets, guilt, and the ability to disappear permanently change?
It raises a profound question about behavioral deterrence. If perpetrators internalize the fact that they inevitably leave an immortal, readable signature behind, does it actually change their behavior, or does it merely change the timeline of their capture?
Because eventually, no matter how far you run, the biological time capsule will always be open.
Yes.
That is the fascinating question we are left with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Karen Stitt case.
It's been an incredible discussion.
It's a heavy exploration, for sure, but it's a profound look at how patience and science eventually balance the scales. We warmly invite you to return for our next exploration as we continue to unpack the complex and the unforgettable. Until then, keep asking questions.